Last time we finished off with huge gains for the Dwarf Alliance against their nemesis Dark Elves. When returned from their break, the player of the Dark Elves noticed the situation, and while it could have been salvageable, the players called in the final vote and tally. As a result of the discussions, the Dwarfs were declared the winners of the campaign, with Dark Elves in second place and Bretonnia third, with Vampire Pirates being chosen as the most influencing and earning perhaps the first special award of perseverance for not giving up even when things look dire. During this time, our regular host, Hutz, has decided to take a break after a usual quote-unquote I took on too much so I'm having a meltdown incident number 44325. As such, I decided that the community consensus rules have become mature enough that the campaigns can be considered competitive format, thanks to the knowledgeable veteran players, tier lists, and the community consensus rules that regularly get updated.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
This time we decided to raise the stakes and officially make it a part of Sun Tzu League Season 2 with its own prize of $50 for the winner. Thanks to Mistru's Discord technical wizardry, we have managed to clone all the chats between the two Discord servers, which allowed organizers to track it all from the same place. This campaign's last few sessions coincided with the release of Thrones of Decay, which did not influence this game much. We have, however, decided to try something a bit more experimental.
This is Thunderdome. Death is listening.
We have decided to slot in 3 players with starting provinces only 2 provinces apart. Initially, these players agreed to expand away from each other, which should have prevented any concerns of early game rush. The reason why this slotting happens is because there are certain factions that are built upon that early power to knock out their threats, including other players, and without those players having a way to respond. With that said, let's take a look at our Lord picks and players and find out who are contenders to win Season 2 of Sun Tzu League Long War. Now, since I will be hosting and playing at the same time, I will need Hutz as my co-host, as means to remain impartial and have him the final say in any disagreements. As you will see from the lineup, this game hosts some S and A tier factions, and at the hands of capable players, they can easily dominate the world. We have allowed these high tier factions because we have observed that in the past, long wars that host higher tier factions tend to be balanced out by other players creating coalitions against them, and as such we are yet to see a clear domination by a sheer faction pick, and all victories have been a combination of player skill in all the aspects of the game. So without further ado, let's get to know our players. First, we have Hutz as Astrogoth of Chaos Dwarfs, a very powerful choice, with an explosive early game but perhaps the weakest mid-game options, followed by the strongest late-game armies bar none. He plans to expand east and south in his region, with his contested area being the Empire and Cathay. Chaos Dwarfs, depending on how they have been played, can have a huge influence on the strategy map, using Chaos Corruption, Raiding, and their very powerful agents. They also have the most complex economy in the game, and more complexity means more things to exploit. Of course, when it comes to Chorfs, exploitation is the name of the game. Next, we've got Korga as Alberic of Bretonnia, a less popular choice as far as Bretonnia goes, but Korga always has a plan. He intends to use the faction buffs he gets from port income to turbocharge Bretonnian economy and scale out of control before anyone can stop them, and bring in more Grail Knights than anyone can handle. Bretonnia in general has a mediocre early game with a bit more improved mid-game, late game using stat boosts their units get and their strong cavalry. They become a massive threat both strategically and tactically. They get access to very powerful legendary lords, and they are the original Hero Ball tactics users. For those who don't know what a Hero Ball is, it is using the maximum amount of high mobility, high damage heroes to quickly disassemble enemy key units as a one unified attack force, and there are only a few ways to respond. Not to mention, they're French, so we hate them already. Third, we've got Gusan as Mother Ostankia of Kislev. At the time the picks were announced, Mother Ostankia was considered an enigma, a very powerful legendary lord with impressive unique mechanics, but a rather weak base faction that is Kislev. Kislev fields highly cost-effective hybrid units, with some of the new units filling the gaps within their roster. With access to a very powerful, at the time, new lore of hags, they could be a threat to whoever they face, if they can get their economy going. But sadly, their economy lags behind some of the other higher tier picks we have in this game. Mother Ostankia, however, consistently ranks above the usual Kislev factions with their unique mechanics, buildings, unique roster, and confederation options. Fourth player we have is Enoch as Manfred of Vampire Counts. Vampire Counts, another powerful pick, while not S tier, at the hands of a good player and the right circumstances can certainly snatch the victory. On their own, books of Nagash mechanics allow them to scale better than most, but their real power lies in their confederations. A skilled player will not only take advantage of the Dead Rise Again mechanic repeatedly with their faction-wide buffs, such as Gorst Zombies, with Manfred's spells and Econ allows the vampires to wage war at a very little cost, and their roster, despite not having access to any ranged units, has the ability to field some terrible composition and turn any tactical loss into a strategic victory. The fifth player we have is Hunter as Throt of Skaven. Throt, for the longest time, alongside Ikit, was considered the best of the Skaven legendary lords. Throt's faction is unique in that their campaign mechanic has huge influence on their units, using growth juice to mutate their monster units with some hilarious combinations. As the Skaven usual, they have very high tempo. They can expand incredibly fast, with the ability to occupy a province capital at tier 5. While expensive, it gives them access to their best units very early. Their main limiting factor is the economy, which requires constant growth and relies on those high-tier units that require faction-specific bonuses to remain competitive against the other top factions. As such, they have a very strong early game and tend to fall off a little bit towards mid-game, especially late game. Throt's other advantage is that he starts in the Empire region, which has the highest settlement density, allowing them to take dozens of settlements in only a few turns. The sixth player we have is Devotus as Eltharion of High Elves. High Elves are a race with a powerful roster that is bolstered by Eltharion special units. Very powerful legendary lords with interesting administrative mechanics and the ability to manipulate AI opinion. What is not to love? Well, except that their economy is horrible. Majority of the time, the only way for them to make decent returns on their economy is through multiple buildings, which require 100 public order. That is the maximum public order, and otherwise most of your buildings are beyond mediocre. So if someone stubs their toe in a province, you're no longer getting your bonus, that is half your pay. Their one advantage is that their early units remain relevant to the mid-game and even late game, just because of how strong they are, and are boosted up by their powerful lords. They also have some of the strongest late-game rosters, which means allowing those Night Ears any Medicum of Peace is asking to get shanked by million magic arrows with dragons on the side. Seventh and the last player we have, Arclinon, who is me, as Archaon of Warriors of Chaos. Warriors of Chaos is one faction that have been getting units in all recent expansions, and they most certainly do need them because of their unique recruitment mechanics. In fact, playing Warriors of Chaos is effectively playing a different game from anyone else. You recruit differently, you build differently, you're built differently. 20 settlements at the richest part of the world? I sleep. A single desolate and ruined fortress in the North Pole that has funny icon on it? Now that's some real shit. Nothing in playing Warriors of Chaos makes sense to a normal, smooth-brained mortal. Playing Chaos is playing an unforgiving and complex way of playing the game backwards, where you think you have found something that developers had not intended, only to realize, no, Developers did intend it. You just thought you outsmarted the gods of chaos, but only to be a pawn and discovered a sliver of how this faction is meant to be played. Like Public Order, yeah, you're supposed to play that as low as possible. Now you may think, I played Warriors of Chaos, and they are just a bit weird but nothing groundbreaking, Lamau. Sure, if you play them like a plebeian with no intention of maximizing our performance, but if you play them competitively, you discover that nothing about their mechanics is what they seem. And it all works like a perfectly tuned orchestra, where mistakes are not tolerated, and optimization and constant manipulation of the world is not only optimal, but it's mandatory. Competitive Warriors of Chaos has an above-average early game with an extremely powerful mid-game and a very powerful late game, very much depending on how well you did in the middle game and how many DLCs they have, since each DLC has been giving them more and more end-game options, such as their best cavalry going from Chaos Knights to Rot Knights and similar gifted units. Our final player, unfortunately, has only attended the first session and he was pretty much dragged in to take the 8th slot, so I do not feel the need to introduce them, but they were playing Lorkir, who was the one who discovered that 2 hours into our first session that our host has disabled sea lanes while he was disabling character loading. As you can imagine, this causes less than stellar time for Lorkir, and he thought that this was the Sunday game because he was looking at the wrong time zone. On the screen you can find the starting positions of each faction. We got some interesting matchups with multiple S-tier factions being balanced by their proximity to each other, and other factions are not being much lower tier, means that any factions can easily run away with the game, and one thing is certain, we will witness some spectacular battles in this long war, and this time I did not forget to record them. Next video we'll be talking about the first session of this high-octane long war campaign and find out if putting 3 players in 2 provinces of each other was a good idea or not. It's not!